Andrew Rosendale becomes the latest Tory MP to join the other Tory party, aka Reform UK. Reform is becoming Britain's worst recycling project, but imagine it being an elitist one that's privatised and comes back to tell you that you're not rich or white enough to join. Anyways, I digress. Andrew Rosendale, the Conservative MP for Romford since 2001, has quit the Tory party and defected to Reform UK. He's the second Conservative MP to do this week. Ex-Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick jumped just days ago. And according to my calculations, I think that bumps Farage's band of MPs up to 7 in Westminster. And the timing is just, chef's kiss. Tory leader Kemi just said she was 100% confident no one else in her top team would defect, but there's a massive whoops there. Rosendale said, the failure of the Conservative Party, both when in government and more recently in opposition, to actively hold the government to account on the issue of Chakosian self-determination and the defence of British sovereignty, represents a clear red line for me. Since entering Parliament in 2001, I have consistently argued, both from the backbenches and the front bench, that the right of self-determination of the Chakosian people is sacrosanct, and that they alone should decide the future sovereignty of the Chagos Islands. Regrettably, these concerns have fallen on deaf ears. Both the government and the opposition have been complicit in the surrender of this sovereign British territory to a foreign power. This was made abundantly clear by the failure of Conservative peers to vote down the British Indian Ocean Territory Bill at third reading early this month, following direction from the top of the party. Sadly, I now believe that the Conservative Party is irreparably bound to the mistakes of previous governments and unwilling to take meaningful accountability for the poor decisions made over so many issues. Moreover, the views and concerns of constituents, such as mine in Romford, have been consistently ignored for far too long. To which Farage tweeted, I'm delighted to welcome Andrew Rosendale to Reform UK. Andrew is a great patriot. The Tory lies and hypocrisy over the Chagos Islands betrayal tipped him over the edge. He will be a great addition to our May 7th campaign. Is this actually about the Chagos Islands? I mean, notice that no one from the Chagos Islands is talking. It's just the white men in suits talking about the Chagos Islands. Reform is seemingly becoming a refuge for Tories, it seems, licking their wounds over losing power. I think Andy was probably just a little bit too scared to get his P45 handed from Kemi. But let's unpack the Chagos Islands just for a second, because when Rosendale bangs on about sovereignty and betrayal, he's not talking about the Chakosian sovereignty. Britain literally evicted the Chakosian people in the late 60s and 70s, dumped them in Mauritius and Seychelles, and managed the main island over to the United States for a military base. So if there's a national sovereignty issue here, whose nation are we actually talking about? Because it wasn't Mauritius, it wasn't the Chakosians, and it certainly wasn't the people who actually lived there. Curtis, firstly, I just want to get your reactions. What do you make of this defection, and what does it say about the state of the Conservative Party that even this dyed-in-the-wool Thatcherite thinks the Tories aren't delivering, thinks that loads of mistakes have been made? Is there an ideological vacuum at the heart of the party? What do you think?
Well, first of all, once again, Chagos, as I literally just said earlier, the right wing seems to be obsessed with Chagos. No one cares about it. I don't need to reheat what I said earlier. So is there an ideological vacuum in the Conservative Party? I don't think there is. And I think that the ideology of the Conservative and Reform Party is identical. There's no difference between them. As we can see, I mean, easily we're seeing a multitude of Tory MPs and ex-MPs jumping ship to the Reform Party so easily. The reason why I think, well, it's twofold, really. The first reason is because it's easy to jump to the Reform Party because they believe in the exact same things as the Conservative Party and conservatism. You'll note that in the 2010 era, you had David Cameron as obviously Conservative leader, and he tried to sort of liberalise the party. And of course, when we break down the policies, it was still extremely racist and classist. But the rhetoric and veneer of the Conservative Party was to accept the so-called liberal order or political correctness. I mean, we had political correctness for about 5 years, a bunch of well-meaning liberals and, people who had no class analysis liberals, I would say like won the debate in that respect for a couple of years. That is preferable to what we've got today with just open Nazis. But the Conservative Party didn't actually like change its views. It didn't become more left wing or more liberal. It was just that was the nature of the debate. That was where the Overton window was, and that's how they got power. Now, obviously, the Overton window was changed. The Conservative Party can be far more open about its real reactionary views, and with the Reform Party, they've allowed the Conservatives to do that. But when it comes to the ideologies of both parties, they are exactly the same. They have the same view on immigration. They have the same view on the working class. They have the same view on economics. They're all Thatcherites who don't like migrants. That's it. And for Reform MPs or Tory MPs, that jump to the new party is easy. But the real reason, I think, is opportunism. I mean, we've looked at polling. Consistent polling shows Reform are going to win the next election. That seems likely to me. I don't know if it's going to be a majority or not, but I think it's likely they're going to be the largest party. I reckon they've had multiple conversations with Nigel Farage, Tory MPs, and they've looked at polling in their own constituency, and they're seeing, well, I'm going to lose my seat to Reform. And given that there's no ideological difference between the Conservatives and the Reform Party, it's easy. They just want to keep their seats. Now, in terms of how this looks, it's a difficult one, right? One might say, well, surely people are turned off by Reform because all these Tory MPs jumping ship, and aren't the Reform Party always attacking the Conservatives for destroying this country? That they are right, but they're right for different reasons. And it's true. So why would anyone trust the Reform Party if we've basically got the Conservatives jumping into that party? I do think it's had a slight negative effect. We've seen polling go down for Reform, but I don't think it's quite a crisis for the Reform Party, because I think the way people vote is very strange. Logically, you would say all the people that went to Reform, you see the appeal of Reform who hate the Conservatives, should now be like, well, I'm not voting Reform because they're full of Conservatives. But often people vote for momentum. People vote for those who are more likely to get into power. So therefore, people might not be particularly happy that we've got the Robert Jenricks of the world joining the Reform Party, but people often vote for a party that they think is going to get into power. And given that the Conservatives are polling third, fourth, whatever, and Reform are far higher, people are going to generally stick to the Reform Party because there's no alternative for them, right? 80% of Conservative voters have switched to Reform. There's no other right-wing party out there at the moment. So most people are going to stick to it. Where this gives an opportunity for the left and the Greens is to once again say they're clearly the pro-establishment party. Now, some might say, well, there's been Labour politicians that have jumped to the Green Party. That's true, although so far no Labour MP. But I think there's a difference here, and I think Zach Polanski can articulate that by saying there's a difference between maybe an ex-MP or a couple of councillors who are alienated by the direction of the Labour Party, and bringing on ex-cabinet ministers who did the damage of what the Conservatives did in the last 14 years. To be angry at the last Conservative government and then happily bring them on is different to a Labour councillor who realises that the Labour Party is for power and wealth and they've joined the Greens. So I think they can still attack Reform by being pro-establishment with that.
You kind of answered my question, because I think what really concerns me is like the number of defections coming from the Tory party and the polling not really showing that a significant dip in Reform. Like it dips slightly, but it's not significant. You've got Andrew basically saying that the Chagos Islands was the thing that tipped him over the edge and not the 14 years of austerity. But whatever, he hasn't got a moral compass. But I don't have faith there's going to be many people who are wanting a change, who are craving a change, that will then say, oh yeah, the Reform Party is just a bunch of Tory MPs that just went to the other side because they were scared to lose their seat to Reform. Because Reform and the Tories really are not different. So I don't know, how do we shift people's perspective to make them realise that you're literally voting for Tory 2.0. You are voting in, or you will potentially vote in, a party that will continue adverse amounts of austerity that we're still trying to recover from.
Well, the first one to know that Andrew has been arrested on suspicion of sexual assault and rape.
That's why he fits in quite nicely at Reform.
Of course, it's a arrest. I don't know if there's been any charges. But that's the sort of people that come to reform. How does the left convince people not to vote reform? Well, first of all, Zach Plansky's job isn't to win over all reform voters. Neither is it possible. You're going to have a cohort of people who are never going to vote for a left-wing party. That's fine. You don't need to go for them. What Zach needs to do right now is, a general election is not imminent. It's still in years. He's still building up his base, and he's doing a very good job at that. So whilst he should appeal to reform voters, not by capitulating, by making things about material conditions, because obviously everyone's in the same boat. Make it about class. You could be a reform voter and you still pay rent, so still pay your mortgage. That's absolutely vital. But whilst building his coalition, the main important thing is to get ex-Labour voters. And that's absolutely working. Many Labour voters are going to the Greens or the Lib Dems. So if he focuses on getting those Labour votes and making sure people don't go to the Liberal Democrats, then Zach Plansky is going to command 20% of the electorate. I know polling has shown that they're close by, but I don't think they're actually at 20%. If you get 20% of the vote, that would be historic, by the way, for the Greens, for any new political party. That's what's important, because there is going to be a subsection of society that will never be convinced by the Greens. They just hear clamp down on immigration, that's them sold. So if you're asking the question, how do we convince people that, reform our establishment because they're taking on a bunch of Tories, you've got to accept there's a portion of people that do not care and are never going to be convinced by your message. That's always been the case. Elections, and this is what the political zeitgeist always gets wrong, is that, you've got to reach to the other side and compromise and you win elections. That's what we're always told. When Jeremy Corbyn was Labour leader, he's gone too far to the left. He needs to get Conservative voters. Yes, you do need to get voters that voted for a different party, but you don't calculate in a way by moving left or right, because people don't think in terms of left and right. And alas, Jeremy Corbyn got 40% of the vote in 2017 by being unashamedly left-wing. So instead of Zach Plansky trying to reach over the aisle and try and go for people who are never going to vote for him, by the way, that's what Labour are doing, by the way. They're trying to pitch to reform voters and it's not working. As long as Zach sticks to his base, grows his base, and then gets 5-10% of those who are curious, that's fantastic. Usually a political party can command a base of 20%. Once upon a time, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party would have had a base of 30 to 40%. We're no longer in that era. Politics is far more splintered. And nowadays, getting 20% of your core vote is really good. You can win a majority on 30%. Shows how broken our voting system is. But you don't need a high amount of votes to win a majority. So 30% of the vote going to the Green Party in a couple of general elections' time, it's absolutely possible.